Hey,
All right.
I will say this.
Stop it.
Linda, go ahead, I'm just kidding.
Every time the wind blows, I'm so excited. That is stuck in my mind.
Every time the
more than
wind blows?
anything, yeah, because you know, the Lord's, when,
He's gonna
one
stop
on the
the
rapture or
I'm gonna
whatever.
stop the wind, yeah.
He's gonna stop the
So you know if
wind.
the wind keeps blowing, we're okay for a little while.
And it was still okay. the
That's
wind
one way,
blowing.
that's one way to look at it, yeah.
I think about that too,
Do
Linda.
you? All right, you just never know what your students are gonna get out of your lessons.
At least we're listening.
You are, you are.
We're comprehending.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
You at least got the wind part. so.
Yeah, I got you.
All right, so,
I meant for me.
we're doing chapter 12 today, but as I said last week, the last verse in chapter 11 is really should be part of chapter 12. So we'll go ahead and start with that. And I just reread it, we read it last week. It said, "And the temple of God which is in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant appeared in his temple, and there were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder and an earthquake and a great hailstorm." So basically what's happened is that John is now able to view the Ark of the Covenant. And we talked about how, and we did this when we talked in Exodus too, that everything that was established in the tabernacle and then it moved into the temple was a shadow of what already exists in heaven. So all these things that we see in the temple and the tabernacle are already there in heaven. And this kind of is kind of the linchpin to the change in direction that this is going to be about the covenant that God has made with Israel. Okay, the covenants that He's made with them, and this is going to be the fruition of those covenants. Now, anytime that we see in the Bible God and lightning and thunder and earth, that is a point of where judgment and is going to take place. And so, if you think about when we think about the Exodus, when God appeared and there was going to be judgment, there was like the earthquakes and the thunders and lightning. And then when Jesus was crucified, when he died, what took place?
A great earthquake.
A great earthquake took place, and the sky was dark, and all that stuff. So these are manifestations of what God is about to do. These are not good signs. These are not like, okay, everything's going to be sunshine and roses now. Okay, so we'll go on to chapter 12, and my plan is to kind of try to deal with these three characters, and it may take the whole lesson, it may not. If it doesn't, then we'll move on to the next thing, but I do want to spend some time on them. So chapter 12, verse 1 through 6. "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was pregnant, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain, to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 crowns. And his tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven and hurled them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. And she gave birth to a son, a male, who was going to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days." These verses are an example of what we talked about last week, about how time on earth and time in heaven are two different animals. They don't mesh up. And so really what John is giving us here is somewhat is a panoramic view of history. Some of these things by his time had already taken place. Some of them were about to take place. But he was able to view them because there is no timeline in heaven. The timeline exists here on earth, which, again, we have difficulty comprehending because we live by a timeline. So some of this stuff has happened in the past. Some of it will happen again. But again, it's just like this panoramic view. It's not necessarily like boom, 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 boom. He's seeing this all kind of going on at the same time. So let's talk about the woman. We have a description of the woman, and what does John tell us about the woman? Okay, there's the sun. What else? Moon. Anything else? And 12 stars. Okay. Now, does the woman have a name? No, of course not. That would make it too easy, right? So, what are some ideas that y'all have of who this woman might be? Mary. Israel. Anything else? Some theologians think it's Eve.
I say Miss Universe.
Miss Universe. Oh, I got it.
Son.
I got it. Miss Universe.
Good, Bert.
Bert, I keep forgetting to bring the stamps for you. Gold stars, gold stars. All right, so let's talk about some of these ideas, because these are the basic three that we see when I talk about this figure. There's a couple of other ones, but they're kind of really wanky. Well, actually, I should say that. So one that there are some that believe that this is the church, that the woman is the church, and this is typically the dispensationalists who believe in the pre-trib rapture, because if you recall, in their doctrine, they believe that the church has replaced Israel. That when Christ was crucified, God washed his hands of Israel and adopted the church as his bride. But we know that's not true, because God in Israel is described as the wife of God. We are described as the bride of Christ. Okay, so there's two distinctions here. But this is a big stickler point. And to be honest with you, this is what has created some of the it's not really Semitism, anti-Semitism. Does anybody remember why it's not anti-Semitism?
Because there's a lot of Semites.
Yeah, because Muslims are Semites. So it's not really it's anti-Jew. Okay? Anybody who is descended from Shem is a Semite. Okay? So that's what's going on over in the Middle East. It's brothers against brothers. It's a family war. Okay, siblings. So they're saying that the church has replaced all those, and this has, like I said, throughout history, has created some of this anti-Jew sentiment that is out there in the world, because the big thing was they killed Jesus, so we can hate them. Okay. Anyway, we're much more enlightened than that today. Nobody thinks that way anymore. All right, so we've got these philosophies here. We've already talked about this one. It's not the church. In my opinion, it's not the church, okay? Because to believe that this is the church, then you have to believe that God has replaced Israel with the church, okay? And I don't buy that. So what about these other three options? Well, what's the woman doing? Giving birth, okay? So this should be a clue to who it is. And if you recall, we talked about some of these prophecies were near and far. We could relate them. We could identify them close, and then also far into the future. So there's that kind of sense of going from the small picture to the big picture. Okay, the same thing can have a smaller meaning and a larger meaning. Okay, so let's take a look at what we can talk about here about these. So I've already read that. I don't know why I put that there again. But when we look at, excuse me, open my notes. All right, so what?
I was just thinking about Catholics would say it's Mary.
Yes, they do, and we'll get to that. Yes, and that's exactly what we're talking about here. Okay, Mary is the number one checkpoint for the Roman Catholic Church. Does anybody know what Mary's title is in the Catholic Church?
Mother of God.
Mother of God, the Queen of Heaven, right? Okay, so the question is, where do they get that from? All right, so apparently somewhere along in the history of the Catholic Church, someone put forth the idea, I want to say Constantine, but I'm not sure if that's true or not, I don't remember. They put forth the idea that not only was Christ immaculately conceived, Mary was as well. They say that Mary was without sin. Okay, don't know where they got that from, but that's what they put forth. And so that's one of the reasons why she has this elevated position above normal women, is because she was conceived by the Holy Spirit, just like Jesus was. And so one of the ways in which one of the areas in which kind of supports them in this, is the zodiac, believe it or not. Now, we're not talking about, and this is a terrible picture. I thought I changed it out. Anyway, it's a terrible picture. But it's we're not talking about astrology, we're talking about astronomy. And there's two different things. Astrology is the use of astronomy to tell the future. You know, like, you're going to get hit by a bus today, stay home, or something as mundane as that. But when you look at the constellations, you have two that play into this whole thing. Verse 1 is Virgo, that's the lady, and then Leo is right there at the top. Now, what would Leo be for? It would be for Jesus, right? Because he is the Lion of Judah. Virgo would be Mary. All right? Now, when we described her, the sun is at her head, and if you look at Virgo, there's the sun, there's her head. Look at the moon, under her feet, right? And then the 12 stars are around her head. And they're all 12 up there for you, all right? So when you look at the zodiac, and the Jews have their own version of the zodiac. And it begins with an M, I can't remember what it is, the Metzerath or something like that. Metzera. So this is one of the things that they use to look at and go, okay, this is when John was looking, he saw the stars. If you if you go back to Genesis, there are many people that believe that when God put the stars in the sky, he did it to tell a story. The story would be about the birth of Jesus. And that when you're able to look up, remember before the flood would have had that layer of water, right, above the earth. What happens when you put water on something and you look at, like, it got a little drop of water on, let's say, a newspaper? It magnifies it, right? So there's this theory that when the firmament above was, the water above was there, it brought everything closer because it blew it up. And so they were able to tell the story of God and his creation and his prophecy through the stars. Now, when the flood occurs, what happens to that water layer between the earth and the stars? It's gone, right?
Yes.
So now what happens to the stars? They look further away, don't they? They're harder to see. So what do people do? Well, they decide to go to Babylon and build a tower. So they get closer to the stars and read them. Now, that's the theory, okay? I don't know if it's true. I'm not saying it's true. It makes some kind of sense, but the sense here is that God put the stars in the sky for a specific reason. It wasn't just to make the night look pretty, that there was a message there. It also would make sense if you look at when in Romans, when Paul talks about no man can stand before God and say he did not know about God. Because why? God has written his story in the stars. Everyone has access to the stars. So that's, I'm not saying that that's the case, but that's what this theory says here, is that it's all in the stars, and that this is what John is looking at, and that this prophesied Jesus being born. All right? There's one more aspect to this, we're going to get to it in a second, that kind of goes along with this idea that this is where Queen of Heaven comes from. Okay, that we're talking about Mary here in this section. All right? So the other option here is that it's Israel. All right? Well, when we look at Israel, oh my gosh. Excuse me 1 second here. I downloaded the wrong one. All right, so this is, I just going to show you the zodiac, the Jewish version of the zodiac and how it matches up with ours. Each one of the characters was assigned a tribe, okay? And in the inside circle, I don't know if you can really read it or not, but like from 12 to 1, that's Virgo, and that was the tribe of Naphtali. And then on through the rest of them, okay? So, and Leo was kind of Judah. You can see Judah off there to the left a little bit at what, 1050. So the Jews had their own version of the zodiac as well. All right, so when we look at the option of Israel, we look back at a story that we read about in Genesis. The dream that was in Genesis. What was the dream that we read about in Genesis? Joseph, right? So we have Joseph, and he dreamed about 11 stalks, right? Who were the 11 stalks?
His brothers.
His brothers. If you add this one and this one together, what do you got? 12 tribes, right? These are 12 tribes. Well, who would the son be? Well, that would have been his dad. Jacob, thank you. I was going, and then his mommy, who was? Rebecca. Okay, she would be the moon. All right. So,
Rachel, wasn't it? Rebecca was Isaac.
Yeah, it's Rachel. Well, Rachel and Leah, so I don't know which one you wanna
Well,
say. Joseph's was
had
Rachel.
dream.
Well, Rachel, that was the chosen one.
maybe I should just go to Genesis and. Let's see. You know, once I got past that, all that stuff, I can't remember.
Genesis
It's Genesis 37:9. Are you looking it up?
I'm looking it up.
Oh.
What, Genesis what again?
37:9.
Okay, 37:9.
Joseph dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers as well. He said, "See here, I have again dreamed a dream, and lo, this time saw 11 stars in the sun
Okay.
and the moon bowed down in respect to me."
Okay, so this was the second one. The first one was the stalks, the second one was the stars. Okay? So at any rate, this would be his parents.
This is his mother, so.
Well, you could go, I guess, before that and find out. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The idea here is that this dream relates back to this vision here, and in a real sense, the sun and the sun and the moon could also include the ancestors, because remember, Israel believed that the family kept on. It didn't matter, the body died, but the spirit kept going. So you can go all the way back to Abraham and include that. So
Reincarnation?
No. But their spirit lived on. They believed the spirit lived on in their children. That they passed, but they were passing on when they had the children born. They passed on part of themselves and something like that. So the idea here then is that this would be Israel because of the 12 stars, and because where did Jesus come from? He came from Israel. He came from, and so that's that giving birth. Okay. And then, I guess in a sense, it could be Eve, because Eve was the mother of all people. But that would be in a minor sense. Most likely, this represents Israel, because as we said when we looked at the previous verse in chapter 11:19, Those are all Jewish symbols that are being talked about. The Ark of the Covenant's not a Christian. We don't have Ark of the Covenants in Christian churches. Okay? So, most likely, this is what it really relates to here. It could very well be Mary, but in a broader sense, it is Israel. Okay? So, the next thing we read about was about the dragon. Verse 3 says, Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 crowns. And his tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven and hurled them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. Okay, so now we have the child. No, sorry, the dragon. Okay? And how is the dragon described? How many heads?
7.
7 heads
10 horns,
and 10 horns
7 crowns on his head.
and with 7
Yes.
crowns. Okay, probably a crown for each head. Now, this kind of crown here is the diadem. Okay, it's not the laurel. It's the royalty. It's the one that shows power. Okay. Now, a lot of times people will look at this. Well, who is this dragon? And they will refer back to Daniel 7. I don't think I did. Yeah, I did. If we look at Daniel chapter 7, and this is what they use to say, okay, this is the beast that's talked about in Daniel. It says, After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its head. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Okay, so you can see where that would come from. There's a problem though. What's missing?
Crowns, the crowns, yeah.
How about this?
There's 7 heads.
How many heads are there? How many heads does it say?
10.
No? It doesn't, does it? So if we say that this is the 4th beast talked about in Daniel, we're making a huge leap here, saying that the 2 are the same just because they both have the 10 horns. All right, so if that's not it, where does it come from? Who is this beast? If there's a lineup with Daniel, and we do see a lot of alignment with Daniel and John, where does this come from? Well, Tom Bradford comes up with a very interesting theory. And if you start back in verse 1 of Daniel 7, it says, In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and told the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion, but had the wings of an eagle. Okay, kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and set up on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And he said this to it, Arise, devour much meat. And after this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, who had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, I kept looking in the night visions, behold, a 4th beast. Okay, now, let's take a look at the first beast. We're going to do heads and, I think it's how it's spelled out, and horns. Okay, the first beast, how many heads does it have?
The first one that was
Yeah.
in there?
It's
One.
highlighted right up there.
1.
1 head. How many horns? 0.
0, yeah.
Okay, how about the second one?
1 head.
1 head. How many horns?
None.
None. How about the third beast? How many heads?
1.
No. Another one like a leopard, which had the beast also had 4 heads, and how many horns? 0. Okay, how about the last beast? How many heads? 1. Had to have at least 1 head. How many horns?
10.
10. That's the one we had just read. Now let's add these all up. We get 10 horns, 1, 2, 3 plus 4 is 7 heads. So his theory is that this is a hybrid. In Revelation, this is a hybrid that pulls all of these 4 beasts into one creature. So he's clumping them all together to get the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Okay? Now, that's his theory. But you can't go back to verse 7 in chapter 7 and say, these are exactly the same, because the descriptions aren't the same. Okay? Any questions? Does that make sense? Does it? You digging it, Linda? Okay.
I got the wind going on in my head.
Just be careful if the earth moves under your feet. Okay. All right, so let's go on to the next. So we've got the dragon, and we've got the woman, and the next thing we've got is the child. Now, who do we assume the child is even before we read verses?
Christ.
Yeah.
Jesus. It's a Sunday school answer. So, all right, verse 5. And she gave birth to a son, a male who was going to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. All right, so the child is Jesus. How is he described?
A rod of iron.
Huh?
He would
It's right after the child is
to rule, a ruler.
well, it gave birth to a
Male.
of a what?
Male.
A what? Thank you. A son,
Doesn't
a
say that.
Oh, no.
male.
A son, a male.
Okay.
Maybe it was a they.
Does
Mine
that
doesn't
sound?
say son.
Well, you gotta.
Mine does.
We need to burn that Bible then.
What version do you have?
Verse
Oh,
5.
I mean, I do know.
She has the Chinese
Yes,
communist
yes,
version.
yes, yes.
So the question is, why would John write it this way? I mean, I realize today we have some
Because
confusion.
there were no theys back then.
Yeah, yeah. We have some gender confusion today going on, but back then they didn't. They didn't. They knew what a boy was, they knew what a girl was, and there was no questions about it. So why would he write a son, a male? Now, in the version I have here, which is the New American Standard, son is capitalized.
Yeah, some versions
So
are not.
some are not. So obviously the translators of this version believed that the word son meant son of God. Okay? And so they capitalized it. There's no indication in here that that's the case, though. If you look at the words here, in the Greek, the two words that are used are, bless you, are arsen and, I can't say that, huios. Those are the two words. If you look at the Greek version of this, that's what it says. The first one, arsen, means male child, and huios means son of mom. It should be man. But it makes sense. It makes sense. I'm trying to enforce these. You know. I think what happened was the little crossbar thing kind of blocked it out. Anywho, it should be man. And so what's happening here is this idea that when we look at Jesus, it's important for us to remember both aspects of his being. He was God, but he was man as well. And so the description here is that he was a human. If you look at the Jewish versions of these two words, and again, remember, John might be writing this in Greek, but he's not a Greek thinker. He's a Jewish thinker. So he's thinking of this in a Jewish sense and translating it into Greek. And so the Hebrew word for male child is ish. And the word for son of man, which is a human being, is ben Adam. Ben Adam, son of man. Okay? So that's an important distinction here to make sure that we understand. That's why it's written the way it is that he was fully human and fully God, as much as a human can be fully God. because there was things that were, you know, obviously he couldn't, in that little body of a human, he couldn't fit God power into. Okay, so that's why if you ever looked at this and go, why? I know a son is a male. Why would they say a male? That's not, doesn't make sense, but it does. Okay, all right. So let's go back, and it said, "Who is going to rule all the nations with a rod of iron?" What does that convey to you?
A tyrant.
Well,
Which is
I mean, it does give that sense of rod of iron. And in our world, it does have this connotation of bad leadership or evil leadership, right? A rod of iron's not like you hitting somebody with a pool noodle, you know, like you misbehaved. Stop.
But you can go.
The idea here is that when Christ comes to rule, it's going to be black and white.
Yeah.
It's not going to be any more of this gray area stuff. It's going to be, this is what you do, and if you do this, there's going to be judgment. There's going to be punishment for it. Okay, and that's what he will do when he comes back. And then it says, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Now, see, you can tell this stuff is not in chronological order, because the first time Jesus came, he did not rule with a rod of iron. It will be the second time he rules with a rod of iron. He'll have complete power and rule. So her child was caught up to God. When did that happen? The ascension, yes, the ascension, and to his throne, which is in heaven. Then the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God. Okay, this statement right here really kind of goes a long way to saying this isn't Mary. Did Mary go out into the desert for 3.5 years? I guess you could say, some people might argue, well, they did go to Egypt, but we don't really know how long they were in Egypt. It was probably longer than 3.5 years. Because the next time we hear about Jesus after he's fled he's 12 years old. Okay, so that's longer than 3.5 years. So we don't read anything about Mary being in the desert for this 1,260 days. So that's kind of takes away some of this issue here and really points towards Israel. So what does this mean? What's going to happen? The idea here is that during this time of tribulation that's going to come to the Jews, there will be a period where they will be sent, they will go out into the desert and be protected. While during the tribulation, when a lot of stuff is going on, the believers, the Jewish believers, we would call them Messianic Jews, will be able to flee to the desert and be safe. Now, we don't know where that's going to be. Where are they going to go? We don't know. But there is a lot of theory out there that a lot of people believe that Petra would be the perfect location for them to go to. And for those who don't know, Petra is in Jordan, and it was a city that was cut out of rocks. It was just carved out of stone. And there was only one way in, and it's a very narrow way, so you can't bring an army in. You had to go in one at a time, single file, which made it very easy to defend. And when it was established, the only downside to it was every once in a while there was a wadi that ran right through the center, right down a wadi. It's like a gully out west. It's a gully. You know, I've heard of gully washers. Over there they have wadi washers. And
Just use that word like we were supposed to know.
well, I use it, and then if you don't know it, I hope that you'll ask me and go, well, what is that word? I'm the word of the day, okay? I'm your Sunday word of the day. It will come through, and they've actually, fairly recently, they had a flood go through there, and people were killed, tourists that were there at the city, and it comes sudden. They don't have a whole lot of warning for it, and there were tourists that were killed from this flood coming through the city. I watched the video of it, and I decided I'd probably watch it. So, let's take a look here and see if this works. That's why you gotta pay attention. I know, I'm just messing with you, honey. It's all good. freaked out by the hidden Inca stuff.
Hi, this is Brian Forster, and here is my book that I wrote about Petra in Jordan.
They all go
we're
out and buy
returning
this.
in April of 2019 if you'd like to join us at hiddenincatours.com.
Okay, here you go.
So this is footage from a couple of years ago, but I wanted to re-look at it and re-edit it into a shorter version because some new information has come up thanks to some YouTube channels like Jimmy's Bright Insight. So there, if you look there on the upper right, you saw the tool marks that we're going to be looking at. And this is the entrance to what is called the Seek. It's about a mile long. It's a natural feature that was created by millions of years of water movement. And most people think that the stone here is sandstone, but in fact our geologist Susan Moore told us when we were on location that it's more like quartzite. So it's 7 out of 10 in hardness, with 10 being diamond. Therefore, you'd have to have very super hard steel tools at a minimum in order to be able to shape what you're going to look at. So as we continue on walking through the Seek, there again you see some more of these vertical tool marks, perfectly parallel. And there's a water channel on the left side and the right side. There you can see some repair work that was done. Conventional scholars believe that the Nabateans, who were an Arabic people, were the creators. But what you're going to see is clearly this had to have been done in part using very advanced technology. And I think Petra was found by the Nabateans, and they decided to do some alterations to it. But Petra is absolutely immense. It's 12 kilometers or 7 miles long. As we walk through the last part of the Seek, we're going to go to the most famous feature, which is called the Treasury, because it's believed that originally it had treasure in it.
You can see it,
There's no
water
actual
comes
evidence
rushing
of
through
that.
there, and you're standing there.
But this is
yeah,
the
there's
most
no
famous
place for it to
part
go.
of Petra, and this is where 90 to 95% of the tourists stop, look, turn around, and lead back through the Seek again without looking at the other 9 to 10 kilometers of this huge site. Now I have to thank our friend Antonio from Australia because he visited Petra before us and he told us that it was absolutely immense, which I had no idea. I thought Petra was this, the treasury, and nothing more. But it's absolutely huge in scale. So there again, you see the treasury on the left, and now we're going to start walking through the entire complex, or almost the entire complex of Petra.
And that's
So you
all
see the
carved out of
ornate
stone.
carving that is on the treasury? The ornate detailed carving is only on the treasury, not the other ones we'll look at. Unfortunately, this is a chamber underneath the treasury that's graded off, and those that have been inside calculate its size as being 300 cubic feet. And those that have actually been inside
Wow, good God.
the treasury itself say that in the main structure, the room, again, is about 300,000 cubic feet in size. That's a lot of material to remove using steel chisels. And you would probably need thousands of people doing the work and thousands of chisels, but I'm highly suspicious that this was done by hand. Now again, there are these flat surfaces with chambers or rooms inside that go on and on and on in Petra. And you can see incredible amounts of erosion as well. That could be from flash flooding over the course of 2,000 years, but I think it's highly unlikely. Again, the treasury is the only one of the facades which is finely finished. The rest of them are quite rough, and we see similar features like what we see at Petra in some of the oldest structures in Egypt. And I believe the oldest structures in Egypt, again, are much older than the dynastic people. So it is possible that Petra and some of the ancient structures in Egypt were initially created by the same people. And I believe that that dating is about 12,000 plus years old. Now there is also this massive amphitheater. This could date from Roman times, but look at the flat surfaces of the walls in the background. Again, Petra is a very, very complex and huge place. And as we walked, we went past chamber after chamber after chamber after chamber cut into the bedrock. And as you've seen in many of my videos, conventional cultures were in places like Petra. This work is likely from the Roman time period. You see the arch there on the left. But then again, you find other features which are far, far more complicated, much more difficult to do, like the flat surfaces in the stone. But again, standard academics insist that the Arabic Nabateans were the initial builders, and that later the Romans came and occupied the area. Luckily, at least one of these massive chambers is open to the public still, and so we're going to walk inside of here and look at this. This is carved once again out of the quartzite bedrock, and its size I estimate at being 300,000 cubic feet in size. There's no way that that was done even by thousands of people with hand tools. We're also going to see tooling, like here, perfectly parallel incision marks, like a huge series of chisels. Parallel chisels were used, but they're perfectly spaced, more like a whole system of chisels was utilized. And I think, again, there's no way that this was done by hand. The material is too hard, and it would have taken way too long in ancient times to do this work. Also, we see signs of cataclysmic damage, such as in the ceiling. You see massive cracks, whether they're natural features or whether they were the result of a cataclysmic event. That's why we're going to be returning in April of 2019. So as we advance along in Petra, this is looking back at what we were just looking at. And yet, Petra keeps going. We reached a point where we had to get on horses in order to continue because it becomes quite rugged. But once again, on the left-hand side, you'll see we go past locked chamber after chamber. There are many more up in the hills that you can see in front. Petra just goes on and on. And in fact, after 12 kilometers, we didn't even reach the end. Here, some of the stone-cut chambers are being used as garages for the people who guard and protect Petra. And again, the farther we go, more of these quite massive chambers on both sides. There on the left. Finally, we're starting to ascend reasonably close to the end of Petra, and it started to rain. So this gives you a sense of the landscape. Some people are continuing with horses. We decided to walk. And we encountered more than 2,000 steps going up. So on the left-hand side, you see the original tool marks in the very hard sandstone quartzite material, and then you see repair work on the right. So obviously weathering on a massive scale happened at Petra. I believe it could have been the result of ancient cataclysmic damage as well as wear over the course of time. And finally, we reached this structure, which technically is at the end of Petra, but in fact we were told after we reach this point that Petra continues on even farther. So again, you can see that the features are similar to the treasury, but not as finely detailed. I think the fine detail work at the treasury was done by Greeks who were hired by the Nabateans. And if that wasn't enough, we drove another half an hour and we reached what is called Little Petra, which we had not heard about until we actually got to Petra itself and completed our study there. So as you can see, there's this ancient entrance, very similar to the Sikh, but quite a bit shorter. Almost like a fortification entrance. Maybe that's what the Sikh was too. And then as we walked inside, and we started to see, obviously, that the work done at Little Petra is exactly the same work that was done at Petra. There you see some tool marks above, once again parallel, and then a series of chambers, not as big as at Petra, and all the charcoal soot blackening caused by people living inside the caves over the course of hundreds, if not thousands of years. But Little Petra is not as magnificent, but definitely worth the time. If you're going to go visit Petra, do visit Little Petra as well. So here again, we're going into another chamber. You can see the tool marks on the walls. And this one actually has a second level down. Again, with our trip in April of 2019, we're going to see Petra in more and more detail. I believe we're spending a day and a half there, which is a great amount of time. And then inside, another quite massive chamber with all the soot on the ceiling, result of habitation by local people. And now we continue on and on again. Little Petra has a beginning and an end. After we walk past all of these chambers, then eventually we reach a point where there is a staircase that technically is the end of Little Petra. But in fact, I was told by those more adventuresome than me on this day that once you go up the giant staircase, there's more of Little Petra. So it could be quite possible that there are structures in between Little Petra and Petra, making it one huge ancient archaeological site. Here again, looking at the soot blackening of ceiling of quite a big chamber. And then an indented area in the floor. And as we continue to wander through, again, room after room after room after room.
And those are backpacks
And
that the
then worn
Nabateans left
staircases
behind.
carved into the quartzite surface.
Okay? Not really, I was just, What?
I mean, if that's gonna be a safe place, how would you live?
Well, the thing is,
Just what you carry with you, or
the,
it doesn't look like there's anything?
part of the theory about Petra being the place is that apparently, or supposedly, there are Christian groups that have already started storing food. Now, I don't know how they got access to it, and I don't know where it's being stored, but supposedly there are Christian groups that are storing food, supplies, and that kind of thing there in Petra for that very same thing. The only thing I can imagine in terms of, we don't know how long they'll be there, because we do know it's going to be 3.5 years, but that perhaps the geology will change enough that they'll be able to grow their own food or whatever. It's not so much that this is back in the day, this would have been difficult to get into with those little Sikhs or whatever they were called. It would be difficult to get an army through there, because you could just position guys with arrows and just ping, 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 pick them off. Which, in the Middle Ages, when they built their castles, they did the same thing. They designed all their staircases so you could only go up one at a time, instead of except Errol Flynn movies where there were like 20 guys coming up the stairs. That would have been stupid, because you can't fight off. Well, Errol Flynn could, but no one else could. So there's going to be protected. So somehow, perhaps it's going to be manna again. We don't know. but somehow God's going to protect them. And it's not going to be so much a defense area where they're not going to be able to get in, because obviously now with the technology we have in weaponry, they could shoot missiles right straight in and hit whatever they want to hit. But somehow God's going to protect them in this location, if this is the location. But they're going to be in the desert. And when you read in the Bible about the desert, it's typically used to describe a place of safety and a place of refuge for Israel, for God's people. And if you think about what happened with them in the desert, it was a place of learning. It was a place that they were protected from Egypt. They were protected from their own fear, vanity. So this is going to be a place that the desert will represent safety for them. And whether this is the place or not, who knows? But I mean, it's ideal if you think about it. You could get a lot of people into Petra and Little Petra with all those caves and holes in the wall and stuff. So that's a theory. Again, there's nothing scriptural that proves it. But I think it's amazing. It's interesting to me and amazing to me also that how much, if one of the points, and I got to back up. One of the points that Tom Bradford makes is that when Jesus was asked about his stories, why he was telling parables, his statement, I'm going to paraphrase it, his statement was that the parables were for people who didn't understand what the Bible was about. Okay, they wouldn't understand because they don't read the Bible. Well, at that time, what was the Bible? The Old Testament, right? So you get in there, anybody can go out and read Revelation, anybody. But Revelation wasn't written for those who don't understand. It was for us, because it's only through understanding and studying the Old Testament and having the Holy Spirit that we can't even begin to understand what's going on in Revelation. And so the information that's there is for us, and in order for us to even begin to understand it, we've got to understand the Old Testament. To me, it's kind of interesting how that just keeps playing up again and again and again. If you don't have knowledge of the Old Testament, a lot of the stuff just doesn't even make any sense. There's enough of it that doesn't make any sense to begin with. But the chances of understanding it without having a knowledge of the Old Testament just makes it almost impossible, an impossible task. Okay? So, any questions on that, on what we talked about today? If there is, just ask me. No?
Oh, just one thing that you were bringing up was the beginning with the stars,
Yes.
Virgo and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Now you felt pre-flood, they kept the atmosphere better, or the constellations better. I'm just wondering, how it talks about things being hidden for a while and revealed. Now with how there are advances in astronomy with telescopes, if there, well, I'm sure you don't know, because I didn't even think of this until now. If there have been people doing little picture dots with all the new stuff that we've never been able to see before.
That I don't know. Possibly.
And
But even when you do you have to have a real good imagination.
yeah.
When you look at these stars and the stick figures that go with them, go like, that doesn't look like a woman to me.
Right.
But
I was wondering the same thing, like, who
But
decided?
somehow those were what they came up with, and they were able. And when you look at the Greek mythology, they use the stars to tell stories. They are up there because of something that happened here on Earth or whatever. So this is something, and the Greeks came well after Israel. And so a lot of this stuff has been around for a long, long time. And they're not there by accident. They just didn't kind of happen and float into space or into place. God put them there. So going back to that picture, I didn't talk about this. This alignment here that matched the description in Revelation occurred on the 23rd of September 2017. Now, what's interesting is if you listen to people talking earlier in 2017, they were kind of ominous about, they wouldn't necessarily put a date, that this is when Jesus was coming back, but it's like, this hasn't happened for 7,000 years. With that alignment with the stars all lined up and the moon and all those in the positions hadn't happened for 7,000 years.
Oops.
So, but I don't know what happened on the 23rd of September 2017, but we're all still here. So either we're in big trouble or nothing really happened. But it's kind of interesting though that you read this stuff in the Bible. John wrote it back in 90 AD maybe, and it's happened. It didn't happen during his time. It happened, thousands of years after he wrote it. So, and they say this is basically the same alignment that occurred when Jesus was born, and that I think Regulus was the actual star. They believe Regulus was the actual star that the wise men saw, because in the story they see it and then it disappears, and that's why they go to Herod and go, "Have you seen the star? Do you know where it goes to?" And then what happened when they left the palace? The star came back, and so Regulus is that. It's a star that I think it's Jupiter. It comes out and then it recedes back and then comes back out. No,
I don't think
No.
it is.
it's just Regulus. No, Jupiter's down there at the bottom by the moon. So this is a lot of stuff here that's I don't even know anything about, so I'm not going to touch on it. I just wanted you to see where the 12 stars were above her head, and then where the sun and the moon were. Okay, so I may have messed up on the Regulus thing. Did I mess up on Regulus?
Yes.
Sorry, I messed up on
That's
Regulus.
okay. It's an actual star.
Okay. Yeah, when I realized it, I saw Jupiter on the thing up here. There's Jupiter right there. Does Jupiter go in and out though?
Well, yeah. I mean.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. Stupid.
No, that's not what I meant.
You've been hanging around
Watch
high
your
schoolers
tone.
too much. Well, yeah,
That is
duh.
true.
Well,
That is
duh.
true.
Yeah. Well, duh. All right. So, apart from the misinformation I'm giving you, you may have no questions. Got to turn off the camera.
Planets move.
I know that.
Stars don't.
I just meant when it was in this alignment like this, would it be a star that, would it be the planet, would it be within a short period of time appear,
Yes.
then disappear, then back reappear again?
Yes, it
Okay.
can, but there's a lot